All right, here we are. I'm Martin from Perfuro Gear, and Perfuro Gear is a brand of cycling wear from the Gold Coast. They've been around for a year or so. We make designs and make original cycling wear, and that have a bit of meaning that my customers can associate with. And today I'd like to bring some content over. We're speaking to Chris Williams, who's an ex-pro cyclist, and I'd like to speak to him about a number of topics about training, his diabetes, and what he did while as a pro cyclist and what he's doing now and after being a pro cyclist. So, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. As you said, I'm Chris Williams. I was a professional cyclist. I retired at the end of 2018. I spent most of my career with Team Novo Nordisk, the world's first professional cycling team where everyone has type 1 diabetes. So a very, very different team. But we raced at a Pro-continental level. So we competed a lot against World Tour teams and raced all around the world. But I'm back in Australia now, back home in Brisbane, riding more for enjoyment than for competition.
Well, that sounds, fantastic. I mean, being part of a pro, and a multi-continental team must have been an experience, and we'll touch on that just a little bit later. But first, I'd like to ask you about, how did you start out? What sort of got you into cycling initially?
I was pretty late joining the cycling game. I was a smoker and I was overweight up until I was around 18, 19 years old. I moved to Brisbane to go to university, and I moved into a share house, and one of the guys there was a triathlete. And the only time I ever saw him was I'd be coming home from a night out and he'd be leaving to go training early in the morning. We sort of run into each other.
Wow.
And that was the only time I ever saw him. And me and my girlfriend, who's my wife now, we were sitting on the couch one weekend. We were watching a triathlon on TV, and a triathlete ran out of the water, Courtney Atkinson. My wife made a bit of a comment about him, his physique running out of the water, and I scoffed and said I could do that if I wanted to. They both laughed at me. 3 weeks later, I sold my car. I quit smoking, bought a bike, and that's how it all started.
Well, that's unreal. What a story. Wow. I mean, that's motivation, isn't it? Wow. I mean, you sort of must have had a bet on the line or something like that, did you, or what?
I'll have a crack at anything, so I don't need my arm twisted too much.
Well, that's great. So that's how you got into it. So you started on the tri circuit. You went into tri from there, and then into professional, or how did you work?
I did a lot of state events in triathlon, sprint events, a lot of short course stuff. But I was never a natural swimmer. I had to really work hard at swimming, and a lot of the time I was getting out of the water and having to chase. I had a good bike leg, and then I'd suffer in the run, basically just to get across the line. And I didn't enjoy that kind of racing because, when you're not a natural swimmer, you're always on your back foot. So I gave up swimming and running and stuck to cycling. I started doing some racing down at the local criteriums here in Brisbane, and that's how I got into it.
All right, okay. And just for those that aren't that aware, criterium is like a short course track, right? Basically, that you do. It's a time trial for a certain amount of time. You do laps, and then you finish with a sprint at the end. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's like the rules say it's a 1.1 or 1.3 kilometer course up until a certain distance, and you can do a timed event or a number of laps.
Yeah, I've been looking at the Gold Coast Masters and stuff like that. It looks like a really good event, and they stage people in different categories as well to make it fair for to get a result. So that's crit racing is actually quite fun. There's a lot of it on YouTube that you can have a look as well. It's really quite a dynamic sport, isn't it?
Yeah, the biggest benefit is you take your circuit off the road. You're not racing. You don't have to close down roads or stop traffic or anything like that. A lot of the courses are all off the road and away from cars.
Well, that's obviously a benefit there, isn't it? Right. So absolutely. And so, have you done any other you talk about you're doing state titles and stuff like that? Is that road racing as well, or is it just crits?
No, after I stopped doing triathlon, had a crack at everything I was doing: state time trial, road race, team time trial, criterium, basically anything I could do. I think across 3 years, I won each category:
Wow.
time trial, team time trial, road race, and criterium. Before I went and raced overseas, basically.
All right. No wonder your girlfriend is now wife. I mean, with motivation like that, that's just unreal. I mean, fantastic, really. I mean, fantastic achievement. It really is.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, just to get into it and then just go full bore into it like that. I mean, I've got into the sport, but I haven't been competitive. I've been sort of pushing against myself and my other, friends and stuff like that. But as you get older, you get injuries and stuff like that as well. But not making excuses. You've really taken a good bite out of the sport, which is great to see. So what would you think you're best at? I mean, you've been talking about sort of flat courses and stuff like that, and crits and TT, which is more almost like sprint events. But what about endurance, like, 200Ks, 300Ks, like a road race, or even climbing? What do you think is your best attribute?
Well, I'm definitely not a climber. When you see how fast some of the climbers go in the pro races, it's insane. I've never been a true climber. I've never been a true sprinter either. I'm what you call a roller. So the flat and the rolling races are my cup of tea. And I mean, my job's always been to get water bottles, to chase breakaways, to go into breakaways, and having that sort of diesel engine and good endurance helps a lot there.
Yeah, right. Okay. So what does chasing the breakaway actually mean? Does it, for my benefit as well, is that just to keep in touch, keep the peloton in touch? Is that, or keep your team in touch? Is that what they do? And where
there's a lot of tactics involved in road cycling. A lot of people don't realise just how much team tactics are involved. If you go into a race and a breakaway goes up the road and you don't have a teammate in it, essentially it's your job to help bring it back and make sure it doesn't stay away. So that was my job, and also going into the breakaways to make sure we do have representation in them, so we don't have to chase it the entire race.
Yeah, I consider that's a real workhorse sort of a job, isn't it? Because you're doing the bulk of the racing, chasing these people, being out in front, and it certainly has its place, and it's certainly part of the strategy. Like, you can see on these racing like Tour de France or Giro d'Italia and stuff like that, there is that strategy there. Yeah. So getting back to your personal sort of requirements, how did you manage your weight? Is it just training, or did you have special diets and something? And because of your diabetes as well, obviously that would have come into effect with your diet and training as a whole.
Well, when I first started cycling, you either train to eat or eat to train. I was definitely training to eat. Burning calories meant that I could pretty much eat whatever I wanted.
Okay.
And I was younger when I first started, so metabolism is a lot higher. You don't have to worry too much. It's a bit more important, keeping your weight under control and diet for recovery and performance as well. In my years as a pro, you feel like you're always on a diet. You're always trying to lose weight, basically, because everyone knows the lighter you are, the better your power to weight ratio is, the quicker you'll go.
And there is a go as well. Right? So, yeah.
Sorry?
And the longer you go as well, if you've got that power to weight ratio.
Yeah. And I mean, there is a turning point though. There's a point where you've lost too much weight and it affects your power output. I've seen a lot of guys reach that. And it's something as well that you can't maintain all year round. You can't be at your ideal race weight for the entire season. It's just not possible. You end up getting sick, or your body just goes into fatigue. You can't keep that body weight down for all year. So you've got to target races, pick times when you want to reach that weight, and it's a lot of hard work, especially through the off season. I never used to like taking time off the bike. I enjoyed riding. I didn't need that sort of mental break, so I rode all through the off season, and that makes keeping your weight down a lot easier as well, and you're not sort of starting another 3 kilos behind where you need to be at the start of the season.
To work it off, yeah.
Yeah. But the start of the season and the early race is always important for making sure you're in a peak condition at the right time.
Yeah, and I was doing a bit of study about this and looking, at a few YouTube videos. It really is a timing thing to get your peak condition ready for a race, isn't it? Right. So, I mean, not only just having your weight in check, but just having your fitness in check and your fatigue in check as well, and getting that distance apart between your fatigue and fitness. So that's a training regime that you build up over a week or 2 weeks before race, or?
Oh no, a lot longer before that. So you'd start 3 months before your 3 months or longer before an event that you're targeting. And you're talking like small differences, but at the end of the day, those differences make a big difference overall in your performance. And it takes a fair bit of experience to know how your body reacts and how to train your body to make sure that it peaks at the right time. A lot of guys overtrain. It's pretty common, doing too many Ks, doing too many hours, or also doing the wrong kind of training, doing strength training when you should be working on your base endurance or speed, not doing enough speed work so that you're not peaking when you need to.
That's quite a strategy to that as well, isn't it? So just getting back to your training, I mean, how did you track your performance and improvement? Did you use applications, or was it just through your heart rate, or power meters or something like that? How did you know when you're building up to it, so you can track it, so you can actually time it very well?
When I first started, power meters were pretty new. So I remember getting out the old Polar heart rate monitor when I first started training the heart rate zones. But heart rate's affected by so many variables, like even just how tired you are or how you're feeling that day is going to really affect your heart rate. So training to heart rate wasn't ideal, wasn't the best. And when power sort of became more popular, we all got on power meters, do testing to work out your power zones and your training zones. And we all had a coach that was writing programs for us, keeping track of our numbers and performances, and doing testing as well through the season.
All right, so it would be combined with, I just understand a little bit about the training zones, where you're splitting up your FTP, which is your functional threshold power, into 7 zones, and you'd go out and train to one of those zones or train to a couple of those zones for your performance. So how would you know if you're getting better? Was it because not just the figures that were coming out of the power meter, but was it your feedback as well, as far as is that where your heart rate comes in, or is that your feedback about how you felt doing that training?
When you're racing, it's you can't tell a race I need to slow down because I'm out of my zone.
Of course. So I meant training for the race, training to get up to the race.
When you're training
for it, right? So
when you're training, you do go off of how you feel, but you reflect back on the numbers to sort of verify that. Okay. You can finish a session and say, "Well, I felt great today. My numbers should be great," but then you can go and look at your numbers and they're terrible. It might just all be in how you're feeling. Other times you can do your best numbers you've ever done before and not really feel like you're performing that well.
Yeah, okay. I've had days like that myself, actually. Even at my level, which is nowhere near yours, but some days I've felt like crap, and I come back and I look at the figures and I'm just going, "Well, I actually did pretty well here today."
Yeah, not as bad as you thought it was going to be.
Exactly. And some days I think I'm pushing it really well, and I'm disappointed. So
but like our coaches were always keeping on top of the numbers, keeping track of everything. But I always found racing was the best way to get a true idea of your numbers and how you're going, because you can't ever push yourself as hard as you can in a race. When you're doing a test on a wind trainer or timing a climb up a mountain or something like that, you're never going to be able to push yourself as hard as you do within a race.
Absolutely. The mental aspect and the competitive aspect that you need to deal with, for sure.
Yeah. So reviewing the numbers after a race, I always thought was a sort of the best way of seeing where you're at. And most of my best performances have come from racing.
Yeah, right. Okay. I imagine so. So we'll go back into that sort of a little bit later on. But how did you first get into your first team? How did that work?
Surprisingly, like a lot of people think getting into a team is performance based. You do good results and someone will see it and pick you up. But like most things, a lot of it is who you know as well. I had a friend of mine who was racing for a team from Albania, I think it was, or somewhere, a crazy place like that you don't hear much about. And they were needing riders towards the end of the season. Some races they had in China, and a lot of guys were sick or injured. And so he gave me a call and said, "Hey, would you like to come do some races?" I went over to China and did a few races and in Hong Kong. And they were happy with how I went there, and I got a contract for the following year.
They do the racing down in Pingshan in China, don't they, right? That's down south near Shenzhen, sort of, near Shenzhen, yeah? Pingshan.
There's races. Surprisingly, a lot of racing in China, especially at the amateur level as well.
Yeah, yeah. I had some other work in this little town called Pingshan. It was bike crazy. I've never seen so many performance bikes in China. Everyone had one, and they had their speakers on the handlebars, and they had proper little like bike roads alongside the main roads that they just hurdle along. You know, you get a dozen of them going, and there's this mountain in the background that they used to ride up. But I think they have one of the UCI events down there, right?
I can't remember the name of the race.
Something they call it.
It's a pretty long tour, I think.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So. And so that's basically how you got into the team. It's just who you knew, and people were around there, and they just picked you up from it, right? Okay. And
I went over to
triathlon as well. Yeah. And your local that comes from your local crit racing and your local racing just being involved in the local groups. Is that correct? And then
even local teams here in Brisbane as well as a lot of who you know, like guys. We'll say, oh, I've got a mate who rides. He's really great. He'd be great in the team next year. And that's how a lot of people end up riding in just small local teams as well.
Oh, right. Okay. I thought it was more like a talent scout sort of thing. They'll pick riders out and then they'll groom them and put it in. But
that at the junior level, where the kids work their way up through the system. But if you're not coming through that system, then it's very different.
Yeah, like IIS or, Cycling Australia or something like that.
Yeah. So, Cycling Australia, their program's very insulated. You can just see from the track program itself, it's the same guys almost every year.
Right. Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for guys that go pro without going through that Australian cycling system. Guys like Steele and Nathan Haas and those sort of guys managed to work their way through without going through the national system and getting that support that you get from them.
Yeah, well, I've also done, actually, I've done commercial piloting. I'm a commercial helicopter pilot as well. And it's the same sort of thing. If you're in the army and you come out, you can get the jobs pretty easy. You've had all that training, and doing it as a civilian pilot is very difficult. I can imagine the same thing as what you're doing with the cycling as well. So when you're in a team, do you is there much pressure to keep your place in that team? How does that work?
Definitely is. You're constantly aware of performing well to secure your contract for the following year. Yeah. It's some guys will sign multi-year deals, multi-year contracts, so they might get a 2 or a 3 year contract.
Yeah.
And you'll see in their final year, they quite often perform a bit different to the other years. That you can tell that there's a bit more pressure to get results and to do well to secure a contract for the following year.
Secure their place. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's one of the downsides of cycling. Basically, it can all fall apart in 1 year. You can get a contract, and if you have an injury or you don't do well or something happens at the end of the year, it's all over.
Yeah, right. And then I guess if it's all over, it's very hard to get picked up again, is it?
Yeah. The sport is run by sponsors, and people giving money to the sport basically, and everyone wants to see value from that and ensure that sponsors come on board for the following year. So performance and results are a big thing, and unfortunately, there's always someone who's willing to step up and take your spot. So it's highly competitive.
Yeah, just on a very brief side, like with this year with the COVID-19 about, and I hear on through different media that the teams are bemoaning that the fact that the races aren't going ahead, and they may actually collapse because they don't get that sponsorship dollar. It's absolutely amazing how much reliant they are, and you've just backed it up, basically what you're saying. So,
yeah, especially for the big teams. Like the Tour de France is 85% of the reason they put money into these teams, and if that's not going to happen this year, they're really not getting their bang for bucks. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when it's all over.
Yeah, well, it is. They see it slated later on in the year. We'll see how that goes, won't we? Right. So, so being in a team as well. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't want so many people going in and out of the team because you've got to work as a team. You've got to have your own team orders, and as you said, you're a roller, and that's a specific place in the team, and then you've got your climbers and your sprinters and stuff like that. So does that help you in any way to give you a little bit of any leeway, or is it for not to break up the team if the team is actually performing well on a whole?
I was the oldest guy on the team. I also had the benefit of working with all the new younger riders as well. A lot of teams will take on riders that are young. They'll offer them contracts over a number of years to show that they're investing in them, and you can't really expect a young rider to come on and instantly be performing really well. Riders are an investment a lot of the time, especially younger ones. So when you turn pro, it's a very different level, and you suffer at the start, but then you get better after racing and training and riding at that level for a couple of years. So
I can imagine. So I can imagine the pressure is very, very hard, but the motivation is there. But then it's such a tight competition. It must be very. I can understand why people they need to find their place within as well. Surely.
Yeah, and I looked after a lot of the younger guys on the team. So I try and sort of introduce them to some of the ways we do things, which I enjoyed.
Okay. Well, that's great. It's the more experience giving back, so it continues the tradition coming through the teams, which is always a great thing to see in any sport, really. So, I understand. With your clothes and stuff, you're basically given, the sponsor says, "Well, this is it," and you're given the clothes, and you sort of wear that. Is that how that works with your clothing?
Yeah, you have your training camp at the start of the year. Come back with a couple of suitcases full of clothing, basically.
Full of gear. Okay, because that's a question for me. Yeah. Right, yeah.
You get extra stuff during the year as well. Your clothes, the amount of time you spend on a bike, you wear through a lot of clothing, so it does get replaced as well.
Yeah, but my main question that I'm leading up to is your bikes. Do you supply your own bike, or does the team supply the bike, or how does that all work?
No, we had team sponsors for bikes and equipment as well. So you get given we had a training bike that stayed at home, did most of all your training on it, but then you'd fly to races. The team would bring your race bike, a spare bike, a time trial bike if you've got a time trial as well. So it was good to not to have to travel with a bike. There are smaller teams though that your bike that you have that you get given is your everything bike. So you train on it, you travel with it, you race on it.
Unless you know it.
It depends on team budget and sponsors, basically.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, there's quite a few dollars in hardware there, especially what 9 in a team, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so you'd probably have a few different compact sets and stuff like that for different grades and different rides for your strategy for the whole team throughout as well. So I mean, there must be a lot of spare parts and wheels and all sorts of stuff that follows you around in a truck.
Yeah, most races we had a bus and a truck. The truck's crammed full of wheels and bikes and frames and spare parts. So always had everything we needed.
So how are your team members managed? Do they manage separately, or you manage together as a group, and your training as well? How does that work?
In the team we had 3 coaches who all took on a number of riders each. So in terms of the training program, the coaches looked after all the riders amongst them.
Yeah.
The racing schedule was kind of split between 2 squads. So you have a group of riders who are basically used to riding with each other, know how to ride with each other, know how each rider works. And you want to try and keep them together as much as possible. But at the same time, you've got to look at the race as well and see which riders are suited to what races. Things like altitude, amount of climbing, sprint races, you got to consider what the race has and who's going to be better off going there, basically.
Okay, so the team would actually consist more of the 9 core riders. You'd have, some outsiders there or sub-ins that you'd sub in and out depending on the race. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So just that that leads to the question: how many people would be in a team?
I think it's up to, the rules changed the year I retired. I think it's up to maybe 23. It used to be 30 people that you could have in the team of the riders that you could choose from, basically. Yeah. We had, I think it was 18 guys from 11 different countries at one point. So every race, it was 6 or 7 guys from that core group that would go and race.
That's amazing, Chris. And there's a lot of different personalities, a lot of different cultures you've got to work with, and languages. Languages, right? You can't walk around with a Google Translator in your pocket all the time. So did you work off a signalling system or something like that, like up yours or something like that? Or how did you talk to each other? Right?
English was our official language of the team. The riders were expected to speak English. We had 2 French guys who essentially had to learn English. That was tough for them. I have a lot of respect for the guys from Europe that picked up English so quickly and easily. And here's me only speaking English and learning very poor Spanish.
Yeah, fair enough.
But a lot of our staff on the team were Italian.
Okay.
So it was difficult because the language they spoke normally when they were amongst each other was Italian. They had, some of them had some fairly poor English, which made it difficult. But yeah, technically English was the official language.
Okay, all right. You didn't want to be feeling left out or something. They go into the conversation. Like, having worked in Asia myself, it's sometimes get that sort of, when people start talking around and around. Yeah. So it must have been hard, or something that you just had to deal with, basically. So with the people, did you get rivalries on the team? There's always personalities you've got to deal with, and with such a close-knit team but such a competitive environment, surely what were the rivalries like?
Outside of the races, you actually didn't see your teammates all together that often. Just at training camp at the start of the year or mid-season training camp, when everyone got together.
Yeah.
And of course, every training ride at training camp is an unofficial race. You'd end up just basically going full gas the whole time, especially in the first few days, until some people started to get a bit tired, and then it would dial back a bit. But it's always a bit of a measuring competition at training camp to see who's going well, to see who's going the best. And I don't know if that's because we're competing against each other, or it's just a competitive nature of all the guys.
I think it would have to be probably a bit of both, wouldn't it? I mean, it's healthy. I mean, it's healthy to do it to promote, going forward, I think, in your training and your attitude. So probably very good. But did you have some people in your team that were like just really arrogant or obnoxious, or was everyone on a really good level with each other?
Oh, no, I mean, I got along with everyone. There's always new guys that come along and need to learn how things are done. And there's always a lot of guys that don't really understand just how much of a team sport cycling is. You're not going to get to the end of a race without in good condition without the help of your teammates. And that's something you quickly learn. You're not an individual in a bunch of other individuals. You're in a team, and they're there to help you get to the end, and you won't be able to do it without them. But they quickly learn that.
Yeah, right. Okay. So depending on where they are in that hierarchy, whether they're helping or blocking or being the wind block ahead of you, so you can save your energy. I mean, they learn that pretty quick, and then they work their way up as time goes by as well, I expect.
Yeah. And as well, teams, if you've got someone who's rubbing everyone the wrong way or isn't well liked, that can affect your contract negotiations as well. You could be the best rider, but if you're not getting along with everyone, or you're not well liked, or you're putting the team in sort of a bad light on social media or something like that, you're not going to go very far.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough as well. I mean, and you're right. I mean, if it's bringing the whole team down, you can be the best rider in the world, and it's you're not going to go far. Right? It just makes sense, definitely. Yeah. And how about rivalries with other teams? And did you get to know other teams on the pro circuit? Obviously, you ride with them quite a lot. So, I mean, there must be a bit of argy-bargy, even back in your crit days. I mean, there's teams in your crit as well. I mean, I've seen some videos, a lot of argy-bargy in some of those races because they're very close contact. But during your UCI run, how about that?
You see a lot of the same teams at different races. You get to know a lot of the guys, and a lot of the guys will actually have friends on other teams.
Okay.
But it's funny, you see them outside of the race, everyone's having a chat, having a laugh, but as soon as you're in the race, everyone knows which team they're supposed to be riding for and which teammates they're meant to be helping.
They've got their race on, and individually as well, no doubt.
Yeah, and everyone is out to beat the other teams as well. I wouldn't say there was any specific rivalries against any specific teams for us, but we were always out to you want to try and beat the bigger teams, basically the guys who have the bigger budget or the bigger name riders. You want to try and do your best you can against those. It's quite often used as a bit of a measuring stick.
Well, of course. Yeah, it's a bit like a tall poppy syndrome a little bit, isn't it, right? You need to, they're the ones that are better suited or better trained or better financed. So you want to prove your worth against them. It's a natural mode for sure. Yeah. And so you're in Novo, and so that was obviously based in Europe. Is that correct?
Our head office was actually in Atlanta, in the USA.
Oh, right. Okay.
So they're an American registered team, but we had our service course in Italy.
Okay.
And all the riders still lived all over the place.
Right.
I lived in Spain. We had, I think there was like 4 or 5 guys that lived in Spain. There was a Finnish rider, a couple of guys in Italy, someone from Ireland. We were all over the place.
Yeah, that's so. And then when you travelled, you all travel together, or you just go to the destination by yourselves, and then the bus turns up with all your gear?
Oh, you all getting to the airport is your own means, basically. But once you're at the airport, you land wherever you're heading to, and the team bus picks you up, or the team car picks you up and looks after you from there.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, that's nice of them, isn't it? That's good. Yeah. So, what are your favourite places to ride? And what would be like one of your favourite races? I mean, whether it be in the US or Europe. I mean, there's obviously we see some beautiful sceneries in some of these races. Which one captured you as being somewhere that you like to race, like you actually physically like to ride there?
In terms of riding, I loved riding in northern Italy. The mountains and through the hills there we've got nothing like it in Australia, basically. But I'm not a climber, so I don't like racing there.
Yeah, fair enough. But it's
yeah,
beautiful.
I actually really. Sorry?
Oh, it's beautiful. My next interview is with a guy who runs a tourism, cycling tourism camp, and he's around the northern Italy lakes area. So I'm
Nice.
keen to find out a lot more about that as well. Yeah, for sure. But
no, it's a beautiful part of the world.
So that mountainous scenery sort of area, is it like fresh? Is the weather fresh, or is it hot, or is it cold, or what's?
I've only ever been to most places in summer. So everyone talks about, like I've been to Canada and in Norway. And everyone talks about how cold it is. It's always snowing, but I've only ever been to those places in summer. So I've only ever seen snow once in my life.
Okay.
I get a bit of a warped idea of how these places actually are. I only ever see them when they have nice weather. So
yeah. No, that's. I guess being your sport, I mean, you don't see many cycling in the snow unless it's right up the top of a mountain. They've had a freak weather event or something like that, is it? It's a summer sport, isn't it? So.
Yeah. Usually when there's snow, they cancel it.
Yeah. Okay, and so just what would be one of the silliest things you've ever seen on a race or some racer do that's sort of funny?
Oh, the silliest thing I've seen in a race. I've seen it all. Last time I did Tour of Poland, a guy on a mountain bike jumped over the peloton.
I saw that. That's on YouTube.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
Yeah. So he went straight over the top of everyone.
It happened in the Tour de France as well, didn't it?
Sorry?
Didn't that happen in the Tour de France as well?
Yeah. I think he's done it a few times now.
Yeah.
I've done races as well where the drivers make some critical errors, even in the team car drivers. I've come around the corner and there's the team car upside down in the ditch.
Wow.
I've done races where the lead vehicle, the entire roof rack has come off the top of the car, and we've lost the cars. I've done races where we've taken wrong turns, and
that'd be taking the wrong turn and leading everyone off up a goat trail somewhere.
Yeah, pretty much, and then have to do a U-turn and head back out.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So just getting back to racing and getting back into a system, how do you actually prepare mentally on race day? What is the things that you go through? Are you a superstitious person, or do you have a set program of things you do to get yourself, get your race face on?
The only thing I really do myself is check my bike over.
Okay.
Mechanics get it ready, but I like to sort of double check everything and go over it myself, make sure it's sort of just how I like to have it, because it's not the bike you ride all the time. It can be slightly different. So I just want to make sure when you jump on it that it does feel exactly how you want it to feel, so it doesn't feel strange, basically.
Okay.
But outside of that, like my first year, I did get nervous at races. You sort of think, I remember lining up for my first 180k race, and I was thinking to myself, oh, this is so far, 180k. Yeah. But then after a couple of years, 180k is a short race. So you get used to it, and you don't get the nerves that you get when you first start.
Yeah, okay. So, if you're the head of the team, you said you're the oldest in the team for a while and all that, and you need to call the shots and stuff like that. Maybe, strategies change or something like that, so you'd be thinking ahead of the race ahead and where you'd do breaks or something, or do you just sit there and meditate and, as you say, go through your bike and, put a bit of air in the tyres, a bit of lube on the chain or something like that?
We always have a team meeting before the start of every stage. So we get together on the bus over an espresso or three and talk about what we want to happen and what everyone's role is.
Yeah.
It's really important that everyone on the team has a clear understanding of what their job is,
Absolutely.
and what their expectation is. Because otherwise you're just just an individual in a bunch of other guys riding together. So if you can set out the expectations for everyone on the team, then everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing and make sure it gets done.
Well, that's, yeah, like a real team. That obviously makes a lot of sense to get together so everybody knows their part, because that's what you're riding for. So fantastic. I mean, so when you finish a race, what is the usual procedure after you finish? A couple of cold beers or something, or what do you usually do to come down from the race? Because obviously it's mental as well. It's not just a physical thing. As you're saying, there's strategies in place. There's things you've got to do. You've got to do your job and be that cog in the wheel. So, I mean, it must have a mental impact on people besides the obvious physical ones. So what would be the come down from the race?
Depends if it's a stage race or a one-day race. If it's a one-day race, you get to the end. One-day races are usually a lot harder than a stage, basically because it's one day, so everyone leaves everything out on the road, basically. And finishing a one-day race is a big relief because it's all over. You don't have to worry about recovery for the next day. It's done. But when you finish a stage and a stage race, recovery starts straight away. So normally we jump onto the trainers to do a cool down. Not everyone does that, but it does help, especially having diabetes, to bring your blood sugar down after a hard finish.
Mm-hmm.
And then fueling basically for the next day. So protein shakes, getting carbs back into the system. Eating for the next day.
Yeah, right. Okay. And massages and so forth. I mean,
yeah. So showers, and then once you get back to the hotel, it's everyone has a massage, and then dinner basically. So you're not doing any other activity really outside of that. You might have a transfer to a different hotel on the bus, but you're putting your legs up and resting as much as you can.
Okay. And what is better for hot showers, cold showers, or something like that? I mean, I've seen a lot of athletes have ice baths and all that. Does that help your recovery?
I've had some experience with the what do you call it, the cryo chamber, the getting your whole body soaked in ice chamber basically. People say that it's beneficial. I personally didn't notice anything. So I enjoyed a hot shower and then a massage straight after to really flush the legs out.
Yeah, right. Okay. Right. And what about scrutiny in sport? Like as far as what you're eating, your diet. I mean, drugs. I'm talking about drugs. I mean, how do they test? Is it just a urine test, or they do blood testing, or what sort of stimulants are you allowed? You're talking about having 3 or 4 coffees before. Is there any other things that the pro cyclists do that are allowed to, that are legal to use? And if there are anything illegal, what sort of stuff is that?
In terms of the legal stuff, like every cyclist has caffeine. We had an espresso machine on the bus, so we're drinking caffeine right up until before you start, but it also dehydrates you, so you got to limit that as well. Outside of that, it's really supplements, like BCAAs, multivitamins, electrolyte
and all that sort of thing.
supplements. Yeah, things like that, and that's essentially as far as you can go, unless you've got a huge budget like Sky, who can do things like ketones and stuff like that. We were part of the MPCC, the movement for, I can't remember the exact translation, but credible cycling. And as a member of the MPCC, you had to have in place internal anti-doping testing within the team. So we'd be randomly tested. So we'd be tested every month, blood and urine. And then outside of that, as well as Pro-continental, you have to be registered with UCI and WADA and ASADA in Australia for random drug tests. So you can have someone knock on your door at any time for anti-doping control.
Okay. Did you see any of it in the sport, or is people generally on the straight and narrow? I mean, we all hear the Lance Armstrong stories and all that sort of things. People just trying to get that competitive edge. Did you come across any of it when you were competing?
I've heard a lot of stories, and I've also seen a lot of questionable performances. And a lot of the time, you don't realize, or you don't see the effects until later on when they actually do test positive. I've seen some riders, and you think, "Wow, that was an amazing performance," and then a month later they test positive.
Oh, right. You had a great day that day, yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah. And a lot of the time you see it in countries where there's not many teams or not many avenues for cyclists to go down, and also where cycling is seen as a way out of poverty or out of a bad situation. Okay. So like countries where they have one pro team, and then everybody's trying to get into that pro team. And when that happens, guys will do whatever it takes to get in there. And quite often that can lead to using performance enhancing drugs.
Okay. And so if they get into that pro team, is that can that be a stepping stone to other pro teams as well? If you're judging by what you're saying about people getting out of a situation, is that how they use that? Or?
Yeah. So once you're in a pro team, you'll make contacts, you'll know people, you'll meet people. And quite often, and that's why you see a lot of guys that race on various pro teams around the place, because they've made connections and they sign contracts on different teams. You don't always spend your entire career with one team.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. And then there's, I suppose, there's endorsements and so forth, depending on where you're standing and all that. So there's probably that thing that you may look at. If you're better than everybody else, you'd be picked up advertising or marketing for the sport or other products as well, no doubt. Mm.
Yeah, some guys get individual sponsorship contracts with individual companies. Sometimes it can be difficult to make those work with team sponsors.
I can imagine.
So sometimes you got to sort of factor that in as well, that the team sponsors might not want you riding around on something that is a team issue.
Yeah, well, definitely. But also, thinking past that team. I mean, and this is leading on to my next question, which is basically saying, when did you know it was your time to retire, and what was the trigger?
Well, for Australians especially, racing in Europe, it's always going to come to an end at some point, unless you've managed to set up something overseas to go on with while you're there. Eventually, you've got to come home. So I was 38 when I retired. And I kind of felt like I was delaying the inevitable. And I intended to go back to university. So, and my wife wanted to go back to work as well. So it was kind of, now's as good a time as any to do it.
All right. So no regrets about it. It was just that time of your life and you just went, well, no, this is it. It's time for a new chapter, essentially.
No, I can say no regrets now, but the first few months when you watch the season kick off again, you see everyone racing over in Europe or riding, and you miss it.
Well, I mean, you've done it for so many years. I mean, it must be, there must be that mental sort of engagement into it as well, for sure.
Yeah, you just got to remember that, for starters, you don't have the time to ride as much as you want or you're used to. That was the biggest learning curve for me. That that life goes on and work goes on, and riding my bike is now a hobby rather than my job.
Fair enough. I suppose you still enjoy it, I imagine. Yeah. Yeah,
definitely. I still love riding. Just got my wrist out of a cast yesterday. I had a broken wrist for the last 5 weeks, so I've been itching to get back out on the road.
I know how those injuries do. I broke my finger last year, and it was only the top of my finger. I actually broke it off in a gardening accident, believe it or not. And it took me out for months. I couldn't, because it was my right hand, I couldn't use my gears or my brake. It was that sensitive, being the top of my finger. And it was, I'm a bit of a pussy like that as well anyway, I guess, but still, you know, you must be itching to get back out into the road now.
Yeah, I'm pretty keen to get back out riding now. I can't ride with anyone though.
Well, that's true. You probably gained a couple of kilos as well, and so
yeah, yes.
So as a person, so did you just finish? Did you finish a season, or did you finish halfway through a season, or how did that work on a particular race, a favourite race that you know called your retirement, or did you?
No, I finished out the season. It was difficult because in my last season, I kind of went into it knowing that I was going to retire.
Yeah.
And I went into it probably in the best shape I'd ever been in.
Yeah.
But then in February, I broke my ankle in a race in Dubai.
All right.
Which kind of put a bit of a fork in the works. I had to have 6 weeks off the bike, plus then rehab and recovery. So the last half of the year was a bit of an uphill battle trying to get back into shape. And then towards the end, when I felt like I finally had gotten back into shape, I retired. So yeah, the last year didn't go exactly how I wanted it to.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy, you know, it must be so disappointing in that respect. You know, you're going into your last year and then have an injury like that, which, you know, obviously it's one of the main things of your body. You know, if it was an elbow or shoulder blade, maybe not as bad, but your ankle, God, it must be, you know, heartbreaking knowing that you've worked so hard to get that form, and especially at your age as well to get into that. So, but anyway, I mean, you've come through it. You look like you're doing all right. Just going off on a bit of a different track now. What do you think about virtual cycling like Zwift and stuff like that? As an ex-pro, or you know, and as a rider now, do you think that's got any place, you know, in the industry, like as a sport in the industry where people will compete, and you know, as a legitimate thing, or do you think it's just going to be a training app?
Personally, I hate the wind trainer. I feel like time slows down, and I'd much rather be out riding outside, and that's why I ride. I ride to go places, to see things. Yeah. So riding on a trainer doesn't interest me very much at all. But in saying that, I've had to get on Zwift in these last few weeks because of my wrist. Yeah. And I'm not sure if it's because of the variability in the power meters and the trainers and the smart trainers that people use, but it's very difficult to have a consistent level. Like there's always someone who is on the screen is doing freakishly good numbers, which cannot be possible.
Yeah, right.
But the system kind of allows it because of it's all virtual.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So I'm not sure how racing would go and how you would police that, because I mean the benefit of virtual racing now is that you're at home and you're not near everyone else. But the downside to that is how are people going to check that everything you're doing is done correctly and honestly?
Well, it'd be like Super League then, won't it? Right? So
yeah. But I mean, the National Road Series for Australia, they just announced that it'll be done on Zwift this year. So it'd be interesting to see how it happens. And it adds another expense as well. The smart trainers, you know, they're not cheap.
No, not at all. Absolutely not. Yeah.
And you got to spend a bit of money on a good fan as well.
Well, I think so. And absolutely. I mean, doing it, you just get overheated. And I mean, I haven't got a smart trainer, but I do have a trainer for rainy days and so forth. And I'm much like you. I can't seem to stay on there for a long time, and my power and my output from it is woeful compared to actually being on the bike. And I think it's actually the motion, the forward motion, the balance, and everything combined when you're actually out doing it live, you know, is part of the experience. And that's what works for me, and that's what, you know, I get that benefit out of it much more so than being on a trainer. Yet I've got a very good friend who has fallen in love with Zwift, and he goes out on the road a lot as well. but he trains a lot on that machine, and I've seen him, get improvements, personally from it. I mean, he leaves me for dead these days as well, and so he swears by it. He loves having that sort of interface, but I guess you need to be a certain type of person as well, and I guess from where you're talking about, it wasn't around when you were cycling, like not in a big way, or when you started cycling. It's only a very new thing, isn't it? Right? So.
I know in 6 years racing with Novo Nordisk, I did 4.5 hours on a trainer, I think in total.
Wow. That was
the
warm up or the warm down, was it, or what?
Yeah, I'd much rather be outside riding, even if the weather's not great. I still prefer to be outside.
Yeah. Okay. So what sort of weather conditions are good for you?
Sorry?
What weather conditions do you like? I mean, I hate riding in the rain, and headwinds kill me. I hate that. I'd rather go up a hill that's 15 degrees than ride in a headwind. But some people like it, and some people like the heat. Some people like the cold.
Yeah, no, I don't mind the wind at all. Wind doesn't bother me. The heat doesn't bother me either. Yeah. I'm not a fan of the cold, especially starting in the cold. When you wake up and it's cold and raining outside, it's difficult to get motivated to get out. But if you're out riding and it starts raining or it gets cold while you're out already, it's not so bad because you've got no other choice but to deal with it.
You've got to deal with it, and you've got your race face on, so to speak. I keep on saying that word, but you're already out and about, and so you're already concentrating on what you're doing. Yeah, I'm sort of the same. It doesn't really matter how hot it is. If you keep riding motion, I've never sort of passed out from the heat or anything like that. It's always been, and up here in Queensland, it's, we have our hot days, don't we? Especially when you go inland, a bit away from.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah. Okay. So, what advice would you give to the serious recreational cyclists to improve? How would you, what would be the best way? Is it just on the bike?
I'd say the biggest bit of advice I can give is don't think that buying the next big expensive upgrade is going to make you drastically better. There comes a point where if you've got a carbon frame, you've got a bike that, spending another $5,000 on top of that isn't going to suddenly make you right at the front of the bunch. There's nothing that will replace hard work. And for a lot of the guys that are starting out as well, I get asked a lot of questions about, what zones should I be training in? What efforts should I be doing? And at the end of the day, if you just ride your bike more, you'll improve and you'll get better. It'll eventually get to the point where, you're doing 12 to 15 hours a week, and then you can really start benefiting from specific efforts and specific workouts. But up until that point, you'll benefit from just actually riding.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I know myself. If I take a run up Springers, for example, or Beachmont, and I ride again the next couple of days after that, I feel like Superman, right? I mean, it really pumps your legs up. But if I'm cruising around the beach all the time, I seem to stay at a certain level. So sometimes it's good to throw in a good long climb just to, mentally and physically pump you up a bit, I think. What are the climbs near you? I suppose you've got Cootha or something like that, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of short climbs. Like Cootha and Mount Gravatt are pretty much in the city. Outside of that, it's a bit of a ride to get to the next biggest climb. There's Mount Nebo, which isn't a real climb. It's sort of up and down the whole way. You've got Mount Me, that's about 50k away. You've got Tambourine, which is about 70k away.
That's my sort of area. I haven't been up, Tambourine, not for a long time, but that's crazy. That is.
Yeah, it's a long way to get to a decent climb, unfortunately.
So, your next move, You know, what are you doing now? I mean, you're doing some nursing, but you're working in a bike shop still, and what's happening there?
Yeah, I'm enrolled at uni, so I'm now in second year nursing. I do some supply teaching here and there, and I also work at 99 Bikes in the workshop as a mechanic.
Okay.
Which is good. It gives me a bit of flexibility as well around my uni timetable, which at the moment is all online and up in the air, and yeah, getting my head around those changes. And we're flat out at work at the moment at the bike shop. Bike sales are up. Like we're busier than Christmas. People are people are wanting to get out cycling basically because it's one of the few things that you can still do. Once the gym's closed and people didn't want to be taking public transport, the bike sales just went through the roof. Our workshop is currently booked out 10 days in advance. People dusting off their bikes out of their sheds. I just hope that when this is all over, that it continues. They don't put their bike back in the shed. They keep enjoying getting out there.
Yeah, well, it's at the prime time at the moment for people to get out. There's a lot less cars on the road. That's one thing. And maybe they do realise that it is an efficient way to get around. I mean, I get around on a bike myself, and it really doesn't take long to get you from A to B, really. So, you know, it takes longer to get there in a car sometimes, and you know, I'm down on the Goldie, right? So
yeah, especially in the traffic.
yeah, well, you know, especially in that.
Yeah, but outside of that, I'm still cycling. I ride here with a group of masters riders. We do when racing was on, we were doing some racing together. But I ride for fun now. I'm really getting into the adventure riding, the gravel riding, bike packing, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, still getting out whenever I can.
Yeah, I think, you know, you talk about bike packing. I mean, I think that's something that's new that's come along. The advent of e-bikes making it easier and opening it up for a lot bigger audience to get around, and cycling tourism is becoming a significant like tour thing to do. And cycling, what better way to see a country than to cycle around it? I can't think of anything better, really. It's a terrific way to get out and meet the locals and actually see a country.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've seen, if it wasn't for cycling, I wouldn't have seen most of Brisbane. I have to find my way to get somewhere a lot of the time, and I'll go the way that I ride. So I'll be driving in the car and I'll take the longest route there, but it's because I know where I'm going when I'm on the bike.
No,
so if it wasn't for the bike, I wouldn't have seen half of what I've seen.
Well, I'm sort of the same, Chris. You know, there's places where you just wouldn't go in a car. There's no reason to go there. You know, so you're out there on your bike, and there's a whole lot of some, you know, beautiful spots and secluded spots and roads, and you know, that are around the place that you can just get out and enjoy, especially, you know, early in the morning. Or I've even taken to evening rides these days. It's a special time of day as well. If there's, you know, the wind dies down, and it's actually quite good.
Yeah, and the less cars out on the road at the moment too. So it's really good.
Yeah. So what positives do you get out of your teaching? Are you still doing your teaching?
I do some supply teaching here and there, but with my uni schedule, it's difficult to be able to commit to regular days. So I get called up every now and then. Mainly spending most of the time at the bike shop.
No, fair enough. Okay. And when you do get your nursing degree, I mean, what do you plan to do with it?
I'm doing it to become a diabetes educator. Is the main reason. I'm dabbling with the idea at the moment of applying for medicine, but we'll see how that goes. But yeah, the main reason is to be a diabetes educator and sort of give back and get back into that area of things.
Because you were, as you said, I think earlier on, that you have type 1 diabetes, and so you have to manage your life and your lifestyle and your sugar levels. And it's you're saying it's something, constant that you have to think about.
Yeah, we're on the team. Everyone was type 1 diabetic, so we're all insulin dependent. We're taking multiple injections every day for insulin to keep our blood sugar under control. And we had the benefit of having a medical team with us, and the experience and the education to have good management. And not everyone has that opportunity. So I want to be able to help others to manage their diabetes and manage it well.
Yeah. Okay. And so when you do get qualified, does that allow you to like go to schools and give talks or something like that, or will you be holding events or be social media? How do you plan to do it?
You can do that. There's a number of different places that you'll find diabetes educators. You can find them in private practice. You can find them in community centres. You can find them in public health. They're surprisingly all over the place. And especially now with the prevalence of type 2 diabetes, they're getting more and more sought after and becoming more and more important.
Okay. Just for me, I don't know, what is the difference between type 1 and type 2?
So type 1 is an autoimmune disorder. So your beta cells in your pancreas that produce insulin are destroyed by your own immune system.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you lose the ability to actually produce insulin, which you need to take glucose out of your blood and put it into your cells. In type 2, it's due to the buildup of insulin resistance. So your body becomes resistant to insulin. And so you can still produce insulin, but your body just doesn't respond to it the same way. And that can have it can happen for a number of reasons. It can be related to lifestyle and diet and weight. But there are also cases where people develop type 2 diabetes without having sort of those risk factors. So, but it is becoming more and more common.
Is it hereditary, or is it purely because of the things that we do to ourselves?
Type 1, you can be genetically predisposed to it. So if you have a family history of it, it means you are more likely to get it. But there are a lot of environmental factors as well. So for type 1, it's quite often triggered by a sickness. I had bronchitis a few weeks before I was diagnosed with type 1.
Really? Oh.
So people within the same family are quite often exposed to the same environmental triggers and sicknesses as well. So it's difficult to say if it's because of genetics or because of environment.
Well, that's interesting to hear, because I would have thought it would be a genetic type thing, but having the environmental factors, it shows I don't know much about it anyway, right?
No, well, I'm the only one in my family that has it. So
yeah, right, okay, all right. It's. Do you think maybe the diabetes maybe caused the other disease or something like that led to the being found to have it, or do you think that was the underlying factor?
No, getting bronchitis is, so basically your beta cells have markers on them, and if you get a virus or a bacterial infection that has similar markers, your immune system attacks the virus and attacks your pancreas. So really, you could go your entire life without getting an infection that would cause that to happen. But yeah, otherwise it could be just luck that you get something that causes it. So that bronchitis, I think, is what triggered it for me.
Okay.
And yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's a story. So look, just on a finishing note now, Chris, we've been going for about an hour or more. What do you see as the biggest change going to come to professional cycling? And, where do you think the cycling industry is heading in the future? E-bikes and all that sort of stuff.
For outside of road cycling, definitely e-bikes becoming more and more popular. I think the government needs to change some of the rules based around that as well. The 25k an hour limit. If you're on a bike that doesn't have a motor so easily go faster than 25k an hour.
Well, that's right. You know, you're cruising at 30 to 35 anyway. So,
Yeah, exactly. And I think that they need to keep up with that, keep the rules up with that, because a lot of people want to use e-bikes to commute, but it's just not, 5k an hour more, and they'd be a lot happier with it.
yeah.
In terms of pro road cycling, I'd like to think that the business model will change after this, making it so that teams aren't so heavily reliant on sponsors and sponsors controlling everything. But at the same time, I don't know what that model will look like. I don't know what it will change to. Everyone's sort of been crying out for it to change for a long time, but there are a lot of barriers to that happening.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of, it comes down to money, doesn't it? And the sponsors supply the money. So if they're paying for it, they get what they want, essentially. And whether you've got sponsors or subscribers, it's going to be the same thing unless you have some anthropologist that's just going to dump a whole lot of cash there. But, there's got to be some sort of underlying reason of it's an investment, right? On stage. So, I mean, I think it's hard to get around, and it's in all sport. You've got that investment in all sport because it is a marketing and advertising sort of avenue. But do you have any ideas about what it would be like? I mean, how would they get funded or subscribe to?
Well, the problem with cycling is it's a free sport, and it's not only free to do, it's free to watch. You have soccer teams and things like that. Like I always compare it to Barcelona Football Club, where you charge people to come and watch a game. You charge people to buy the equipment, buy sponsored items. But cycling, you don't have that option. You can't charge people to come and stand next to the road.
The side of the road. Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah, it's free to watch, and because everything's so heavily reliant on sponsors, any equipment or anything that they do sell, a lot of the time they don't own that. That goes back to the responsibility of the sponsors. So, for example, if you're sponsored by specialized bikes, you can't start selling specialized bikes. That always goes back to the sponsor. So it's very difficult. I know they tried to change the race formats, especially like in the Tour of Colorado, where they tried to tie it in with a music festival and essentially charge people to come and watch it, which was a great concept, but it fell through. And yeah, I think something like that needs to happen where teams can generate their own income.
Yeah, right. Fair enough. Okay. So I was thinking the other way with that, of getting people to charge it, like if they've got people in that space, like they do with racing and stuff, like the car races, they don't let people go in and out of that space, so that some of that money goes towards the cycling. Is that what you mean? Like,
yeah.
With the music contest. Yeah.
Yeah. They tried it in Colorado. I think the company that was organizing it ended up falling apart, and so it ended up getting cancelled. And I know now there's a lot of talk about TV rights and the money that TV companies generate from professional cycling races, and perhaps the teams being able to get a piece of that, because essentially they are earning it for them.
Yeah.
But I don't see that happening anytime soon. I don't see them relinquishing that money anytime soon.
Well, I mean, they have a lot more expenses too, because if you're talking about road racing, I mean, it's over, as you say, 180 k's is a short race. So this is where helicopters and all that sort of stuff comes in. But I suppose maybe they'll be using drone technology a lot these days as well, which will probably, you see a lot of the helicopter usage drop, because they'll be able to get a lot more in close and personal with drones as well. They can come from any angle. Just thinking out loud about it, it's probably a lot cheaper than using aircraft and so forth. But that's food for thought for the media companies, I guess. And then if that's the case, well, then maybe there is a bit more to share around, isn't there? So.
And I mean, the other problem is a lot of the races, they're owned by event companies. ASO owns the Tour de France, and the Giro, RCS owns a lot of other races as well. So it's difficult to be able to generate an income from it when someone else owns it. It's not like Formula One where they own the whole thing, basically.
Yeah.
They own all the rights to it. So, yeah, I think a different racing format or a different racing league needs to happen for teams to be able to generate their own income.
Mm. So that I was going to finish it there, but you've just prompted another question. I'm sorry about this, but
You're right.
what sort of, I don't need to know the amounts, but how did your income, obviously being a professional racer, how was that judged and how was that paid and the amounts paid?
So once you reach professional continental level, there's minimum salaries.
Okay, who pays that? The UCI or is it the teams?
I think the UCI decides it. As far as I'm aware, yeah. So the World Tour teams and Pro Continental teams, they have minimum salaries that they need to meet, but you're able to negotiate anything over that within your contract. The downside is anything below that, anything below Pro Continental, so continental level or below, and also women's cycling, they don't have a minimum salary. And a lot of those people are just doing it for free because they love it. And yeah, and they're trying to break through. And there's a big push now to have a minimum salary for women.
Well, I think so. They're just as much as the athletes. I mean, they do phenomenal things as well as the men do, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. And if you look at the average age of the women's peloton, it is much younger than men. And I think a big part of that is because you can't do it for forever. If you're not getting paid, you've eventually got to go and do something that does earn money. So the women's peloton average age is pretty young.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, that certainly makes a lot of sense. But it would be good to see, some money going into women's sport. You see it now in the cricket and the football and stuff like that here in Australia. You only just recently seen in the last couple of years. So it'll be good to see that extend to cycling because, especially, I imagine in Europe, or especially Europe, maybe South America, that there's a lot of women cyclists that would be on the tour.
And it would make it a lot easier for Australians too that want to try and get into the professional ranks because for an Aussie to go over to Europe and live there and race for free,
it's an expense, right?
Yeah, big expense.
And so why would they do that? Do they get endorsements for advertising or something like that after that? Or they get jobs with, the big sponsors or companies at the end of the day? Is that the motivation to do that? Or, but beyond the sport,
beyond the sport, a lot of guys will take up director roles or coaching roles with a team. But in saying that, there's only a certain number of roles, and there's a lot of riders that retire every year. So quite often, guys just disappear, and there's a lot of guys who will be riding from a very young age, from a junior age, and their whole entire focus has been racing and becoming a professional, and they won't have done any other study or any other trade, and it's difficult when they stop because you've got to do something, and unless you've got something to fall back on, you're going back to study and to learn a trade.
And at a mature age, and you've got to earn money, you might have a family and all that sort of stuff. It makes life difficult, doesn't it? If you don't have that backup or you don't have that savings behind you or whatever, that winnings, so to speak, or that, the price for being in the team. I mean, I think that happens a lot in a lot of sports. Like you say, like imagine, rugby, for example. I mean, you've got your players, the top players are on top money, but there's a lot of other players that, get the salary and then they go into obscurity afterwards, but they're 34, 35 after that. The same sort of thing. And cycling would be, even more so because it's probably not as much money in the sport in Australia than there is in other sports. But Europe, I imagine, would be, a little bit, I guess. But you said it's controlled by the UCI, right? So.
It's at the same time, though, I see a lot of guys on the other end of the scale who have been doing it for a long time since they were kids, and they come through. And a lot of guys that go over to Europe can't handle the distance, being away from family, being away from friends, being alone and isolated in a country that doesn't speak your language. And a lot of guys will will quit, will retire and go home. But quite often it's guys who don't realize there are worse things you could be doing than living in Europe and racing your bike.
Yeah, I reckon. I mean, I was a lot younger, and it was about 20 years ago. I moved to Japan, right, and that's in a culture and someone speaking completely different as well. To hook up with another company myself, and I was like that. But I actually loved the experience. I loved living over there, and I had a great time. But I guess you're right. It comes down to personalities and how they feel about their home and stuff like that.
Hmm.
All right, Chris. Look, I mean, I think I'll wrap it up there. We've had a really good chat, and thanks very much. I really appreciate you coming on and giving us an insight into your life as a cyclist and what you're doing now after the sport, and how you keep and maintain your fitness, and how you keep active in the sport, even though you're not competing. So thank you very much.
Not a problem. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, that's all right.